Welcome to The Shuby Show, where sports, movies, TV shows, technology, history, and more come to life. Now, please be seated and get ready for some more never-ending nonsense with yours truly, Shuby.
This is The Shuby Show with yours truly, Carson Schubert, and also known as Shuby, of course. And today on the show, we've got our first returning guest. His name is Rhett Bollinger, Twins beat writer for MLB.com. And Rhett will be joining us to talk about the Twins. Second place right now, 2.5 games out of first, half a game ahead of the Royals, who are in third. And the Twins are looking to potentially make the playoffs. We'll talk a little bit about that and see if the Twins really have a realistic shot of making the playoffs. Will they make some trade deadline moves? We'll talk about Miguel Sano, and he's going to be in the All-Star game along with Irvin Santana, and Brandon Kinsler was selected as a reserve. So we will talk a little bit about both of those guys as well, but I feel like Sano got snubbed from being an all-star starter. He's an all-star, but he's not starting. Jose Ramirez gets the start. Maybe I blame Terry Francona. He just probably tweaked it a little bit, but you know, he's actually been dealing with some health issues, so maybe he had nothing to do with it at all. But we do wish Terry Francona the best, and I don't know if he's actually going to be able to coach or manage in the All-Star game, but that is going to be Tuesday, and tonight is the Home Run Derby with Sano. Going to be in that, along with Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton, so I'm hoping to be able to catch that tonight sometime, because I think that'd be a lot of fun just to see how far the baseball goes. Between Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, and Miguel Sano, just those three alone should make you want to listen, or not listen, but watch the Home Run Derby, because it is going to be incredible to see just how far those baseballs go. And I'm looking forward to hopefully catching some of that tonight. Recording on a Monday. The episode will be released sometime on Monday afternoon. So, Rhett Bollinger coming out after this. You're listening to The Shuby Show. Get us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're on all of those social media sites. And subscribe to us on iTunes, YouTube, Stitcher, TuneIn Radio, all those great places. And don't forget also to leave a review on iTunes. We would really appreciate if you could leave a review. It takes 5 minutes at the very most of your time to leave a review. If you have an iTunes account and you are a podcast listener via iTunes, then we would appreciate if you could leave a review, because we would like to get up the rankings as high as we can. We're trying to build this thing. We appreciate last week's show. Did really, really well. Jerry Mathers, also known as Leave It to Beaver or the Beaver, was on the show last week, and that got a lot of you really excited about the show, and it's good. And now, after 2 weeks of not talking about sports, or 2 episodes, I should say, we were on a long break there for a while, but talked about bartending with Dusty O'Connell, and we talked about Leave It to Beaver's life, Jerry Mathers' life and career, and different things with him last week. So if you didn't listen to that, then go listen to that, because it was a really good podcast. We've had many very good comments on it, so if you haven't listened to it, it was a very good conversation. So without further ado, Rhett Bollinger coming up next on The Shuby Show. Welcome back, and we're returning for the first time, and our first return guest here on the Shuby Show is Rhett Bollinger, Twins beat writer for MLB.com. Rhett, I appreciate you joining and taking the time to be here today.
No problem. Definitely excited to be back on.
So, Rhett, you got to have a little bit of time off this week after a long grind from early April all the way until here in the middle of July, and now you kind of get a little bit of time off. That's got to make you feel a little bit better about going into the second half of the season, I would imagine.
Yeah, definitely. It's always nice to have that break, and kind of get away from it for a few days. Although I'm sure I'll probably still watch the Home Run Derby tonight and watch the All-Star Game on Tuesday. I still enjoy those big events.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, yeah, I'll be relaxing by the pool a little bit, kind of unwinding, getting away from baseball for the most part. I think the players are doing the same thing. A lot of players are going up to cabins in Minnesota or just sticking around here and just relaxing and kind of getting away from it. Play some golf, that kind of stuff, and just kind of get your mind off of the grind, but back at it again pretty soon here.
Yeah, it is a break, but it is a pretty short break. But I'm sure the guys will be ready to get back at it and try and chase a playoff berth, hopefully, for the Twins. So talking about the Twins here, the first time we talked, the Twins were just starting the season. I believe they were 2-0, and it was going to be Game 3 the night or the day that we talked. That night was going to be Game 3 against the O's, and they started out by sweeping the O's, I believe, and then they also, I think they won 2 out of 3 maybe against the O's. I think it was 2-1, and then they swept Kansas City. That's what it was. And anyways, the Twins were off to a good start, and they are still 2 games above 500 and only 2.5 games out of first place here at the All-Star break. Rhett, did you think that would be the case at this time?
No, not really, to be honest. I thought this team might, best case be around 500, but so far I think they've pretty much exceeded expectations, I think. So the team I think most people picked to finish, 4th or 5th in the division along with the White Sox. I think by this time I think most people, including myself, thought the Indians might be running away with the division. That just hasn't happened. The Indians haven't really played as well as everyone expected them to. The Twins are still in it. The Royals are still in it. And I thought the Royals, were going to be out of it too after their slow start. So, the Twins have definitely hung in there and played better than expected. They've had, to end with the 2 losses against the Orioles obviously didn't help. But, they're still having a good season. We'll see kind of how they play here coming out of the break and how much that affects, the chances they had on the deadline, that kind of stuff. But for the most part, I think get to be pretty pleased with the way they played, as a team that wasn't expected to contend, and to get, the performances they've got from guys like Irvin Santana, Jose Barrios, and, Miguel Sano and Kinsler, and, Taylor Rogers has been a great reliever for them.
Oh, he's been fantastic.
So they've had and defensively they've been as good as I expected. I thought they're going to be very good defensively, and truthfully, even better in terms of, I think that Sano, even though Polanco hasn't really hit much, I feel like he's been pretty good, at shortstop defensively for the most part. This defense has been, kind of got a long way toward this team being above 500.
Yeah, and one of the things I think the Twins, they had a really good winning month of April, but it seems like, to me, especially over this past month, it seems like they've played more like a 500 team, and maybe even they've been below 500 the past month. I'm wondering, do you think that continues, or do you think they'll kind of maybe have another winning month yet in this year, or do you think it'll be kind of about 500, maybe a little bit below?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think at this point, true talent-wise, they're probably really more like a team that could be hanging around 500 or, more likely to be a little bit below it. Just because of the pitching, Irvin Santana and Barrios have been great, and I expect them to be good the second half as well. But it's kind of the rest of that rotation is pretty shaky. Gibson got into a little bit better of a run, but looked, pretty bad on Sunday. Santiago's in the DL and hasn't really done much since April. It's just not much depth, It's just kind of the issue right now is, in terms of getting better starts is going to be so key for them in the second half. And I don't know if they have the guys to do that, unless they, were to make a trade, which would surprise me if they made a big trade, just because I feel like they're still kind of, building toward the future more so than wanting to go all in this year, in a sense. So I just think pitching might hold them back, but you never know. And the hard thing, too, is the schedule this month especially is tough. They go to Houston right out of the break. They host the Yankees for 4 games, and as much as the Yankees haven't been playing as well recently, they're still the Yankees, and they're still a good team with Judge, and we definitely know how they usually play against the Twins. And then you got the Dodgers in LA as well. So yeah, it's a tough slate coming up here. And so if they can hold their own and be 500-ish, against those type of teams, that means they're probably going into the deadline similar to where they are now, which I think if they're like this, they're probably more likely to just maybe get a reliever or something like that, and buy, but not be big buyers.
Mm-hmm.
But if they were to fall apart and really struggle the next, 15 games or so, they'd have to consider selling. But even then, with the new wild cards, it's like, would they really even be that far behind? You know what I mean? Because
Right.
with two wild cards, there's so many teams in contention. All it would take is another, solid, August like they had in April, and all of a sudden they could be back in it, because everyone wanted to bury the Royals, and and they're back in
Yeah,
it now too.
exactly.
So it's a really weird. They're in a really weird spot, just because I think this new front office probably didn't even anticipate them being above 500.
Right.
But the fact that they are, they've got a shot here still. So you can't wave the white flag and be sellers if they're in it, because it's just bad for the fans, it's bad for the clubhouse.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously they do have and Santana, Dozier, and even Kinsler, they have pieces to sell if they really want to build more toward the future. But it's just hard to do that when they're playing above 500 ball.
Right, and you got so many young pieces already. I think pretty soon by all the people you sell, you're going to have all really young players, which
Mm-hmm.
we like to have young players, but I think you also have to caution yourself from having too much youth. I think
Exactly.
I think the Timberwolves, for example, another Minnesota sports team that kind of had too much youth on it, where they didn't have enough playoff experience, and now they're kind of making some deals to get some players that have that playoff experience. And I think the Twins, maybe that's part of what they're lacking too, because Joe Mauer, while he's been in the playoffs, he hasn't been past like the first round or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the other guys really don't have a lot of experience in the playoffs either. So it's one of those things where even if the Twins make the playoffs, you're probably not looking at much of a run, but at the same time, you are doing so well this year and are at least exceeding expectations. Do you think about making some big deals? Because you never know. If you have an injury or two, that could really alter your future next year or whatever, and maybe you just need to, you don't want to put all your chips in, but maybe you need to trade some of those younger pieces, because I feel like the Twins farm system is still pretty loaded. I mean, there's still guys I think that can contribute in the future, but like there's so many other guys where it's like, well, this position is filled for the next 10 years. I don't think the Twins are going to be able to use that guy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. You're right. There is definitely a lot of young talent in that system. And you're right in the sense you don't want to have a team that's too young in terms of, you're right, experience and leadership. And then even just because sometimes young players have a tendency sometimes to go into funks more, too.
Right.
We've seen it, even last year, like Miguel Sano is obviously incredible this year, but, last year he wasn't, himself in a sense because he's young. Like those kind of years happen sometimes and you're still kind of figuring out who you are as a hitter. And you can you can be a little streaky, as a young player until you kind of get consistent. So yeah, it's a big part of it, and also, the leadership part of it. Urban Santana is a mentor to Mejia and to Barrios. Dozier is pretty much the de facto club leader at this point, in that clubhouse. So, if you were to get rid of him, that would not be a popular move at all in the clubhouse.
Or the fan base.
I do wonder, though, I know you're right about the fact they have a pretty good farm system still, and they could go for, trade for veterans. I guess my take on it is I just am more likely to see that happening maybe in the off season.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I just don't think, because you know what I mean? If they're going to trade for the guys right now that are on the market that are the big time pitchers that would really help are guys like Chris Archer, Sonny Gray, maybe Garrett Cole from the Pirates. But because the thing is, they're not going to trade for a starter who's going to be a free agent. They're going to trade for a guy who's going to be under control for years to come.
Yeah.
But those type of pitchers, cost a lot of prospects.
Yeah.
It's going to take, a handful of very good prospects and potentially even a Nick Gordon type or something like that. And I just don't think the front office is willing to do that yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're more, and because they're going to be bidding against teams, that are legitimate contenders, teams like the Dodgers, that really need pitching, or, it just seems like the price might be too high to do that during the season, whereas maybe in the off season, they could talk with more clubs about, young, controllable starters and make some deals in the offseason. And they'd have more time, too, because you got to remember, too, the new front office, I mean, there are holdovers, but the new front office hasn't had that much time to really evaluate their own prospects. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like they've got some guys like Rob Anthony's been there, and Mike Radcliffe's been there, and Darren Johnson's been there. Some guys in the scouting directors, they kind of know their own guys in that sense. But the real decision makers, though, Falvey and Levine, have only have a few months of data on their actual minor leaguers, and they've only probably maybe seen these guys. I know Falvey's gone down to the minor leagues a couple times to see these guys, but they probably don't have a firm grasp on what they'd be giving up yet in terms of making a deal for a frontline starter type guy. So I'm just curious. I just don't. At this point, I haven't talked to them. I just don't think they're going to go all in and try to get that big pitching help. I mean, so far we know they went and got Bartolo Colon, and that'll be interesting to see how he does. I don't think he's going to be the answer, but if he can come up here and post an ERA even in the fours, the Twins would take that. That'd be an upgrade over what they have right now.
It's a sexy move, though, right?
Yeah, big sexy, right? It'll be fun to watch. I mean, that's the thing. When he signed, and my Twitter feed went crazy. So, I mean, I'm definitely excited about that in terms of just he's such a fun player to watch. And, all that. And from what I hear, too, he's a good clubhouse guy. So it's exciting if it were to work out. But at the same time, obviously, he had an 80 ERA with the Braves.
Yeah.
So you never know. But if his command returns, he was good last year.
Yeah, he was. But, he is getting old. I think any contribution past this year would definitely be silly to think about. But just looking at some of this young talent, the Twins just got a whole bunch of young talent, and I think a lot of people, including MLB.com, believe the Twins had the best draft of anybody this past year. And it's hard to not have the best draft when you have the number one overall pick, and you have such a and I really don't know a ton about the MLB draft, honestly, because it is one of the hardest things to keep track of because there's so many rounds and so many different prospects and everything. But one of the first overall pick for the Twins and the first overall pick in the draft was Royce Lewis, and there was much speculation of who they were going to draft, and I don't think many people thought about Royce Lewis as actually even being a possibility. I think a lot of people thought he'd be a top 5 pick, but I don't think anybody thought he would be number 1 overall, except maybe the Twins. But he's got a really good 5 tools, for sure 4, and that power might develop later. He's got the ability, if he plays at shortstop, I think he could even be the future shortstop, honestly, because with Nick Gordon's fielding, we don't necessarily know if he's for sure going to be the shortstop of the future. And I know Dick Bramer and Bert Blyleven, and I think Bert mainly, talks a little bit about Jorge Polanco being the long-term shortstop, and I just don't see that happening. Maybe 5 years, maybe a 5-year shortstop, but probably not any longer than that, because I feel like one of those guys is probably going to take it over at one time. But what are your thoughts on Royce Lewis and just the draft overall?
Well, you're right. It's definitely interesting, number 1 overall pick, and having the number 1 pick definitely helps in terms of, the reason why they're, ranked number 1 in terms of best draft. But a lot of it was because of strategy. The Twins decided to go with Royce Lewis over guys like Hunter Green and Brendan McKay, who both got huge, huge bonuses. I think they were both over slot bonuses that would have took up the entire, slot money for the Twins in terms of that pick. And after that, they probably would have had to stay. All the rest of their picks for the first 10 rounds would have had to have been right around slot. But because they saved money in drafting Lewis, they had extra slot money to spend on more time. Otherwise, would have been able to sign. So a guy like Blaine Enlow, who's a pitcher from Louisiana they liked a lot, there was no chance that they could have got him if they didn't have slot money there. And really, not many other teams could have got him. He would have went to college. Would have went to LSU, but the Twins gave him $2 million when I believe the slot money was like 1 point something. So, I think the strategy really worked this year. It can be a little risky because obviously if you're saving money up top, you have to, guys have to be there for you to spend that money on, Mm-hmm. But it worked out where the guys that they wanted, and I think there was, a Puerto Rican third baseman that they went over slot with as well. So, yeah, I mean, they definitely liked a lot of guys that they got in those first 10 rounds. And sometimes you mix in them college seniors, they're going to cost you a little bit less. Brent Rooker was an intriguing guy with a lot of power. I think he's already hit 5 home runs so far since being drafted. And Lewis, I think Lewis is going to have power. I mean, the guy, at all the showcase events, showed off a lot of power. I mean, I think he had a home run out of Wrigley Field. The power is there. I mean, I think the question, even shortstop-wise, and the Twins do believe he's going to stay there. But even he, from some of the scouting reports I've read and talked about, there's a chance he could end up in center field too. You never know. He's so young. When they're 18 years old, best case, he's probably 3 or 4 years away from being up here, so you never know. But this, the nice thing about this organization right now is that they have a lot of shortstops.
Yeah.
You look at Royce Lewis, and then in the international signing day on July 2nd, they signed Jelfry Marte, who was the number 3 overall international prospect and the number 1 shortstop. I mean, this is, a guy that's this is a guy that's known for his defense a little bit more. He's supposed to stick at shortstop. So you got him, but he's only 16 years old. You got Royce Lewis, who's 18. Nick Gordon's, 20 years old. You've got Engel Vielma at AAA, who's 21, 22. You got Jermaine Palacios in the Florida State League, who's 19 or 20. They've got a lot of shortstops, which is a good thing, though, because obviously a shortstop can move around. They can play third, they can play second, they can play center field a lot of times, too. Or, if you have a lot of shortstops, which is, the most valuable player you pretty much can have on the position side of things, you can use those in a trade. You can trade those guys when they have a lot of value. So I think the front office is doing a smart thing in that sense. I know a lot of fans were mad that they didn't take a pitcher. But at the same time, there was no pitcher that was really available there that was a better choice than Lewis. And I think Baseball America just released their top 50 prospects updated list. And Hunter Green was ranked ahead of him, but Lewis was ranked second among all the prospects drafted and was ahead of McKay and all those kind of guys. So it wasn't like the Twins reached or drafted some guy that wasn't supposed to be good. They drafted a guy that was considered, usually in the top 2 or 3 best prospects in the draft. And they took him number 1, and they saved money to get better guys later. And it wasn't like these guys that got, Green and McKay were that much, were considered that much better at all. So yeah, and to Lewis's credit, he's played really well so far. He homered in his first game, and he's considered a great clubhouse guy, and even like talent-wise too. He was the California Player of the Year. And don't forget the Hunter Green's from California in the same high school class. So he got that award over Hunter Green. So as much as some fans acted like they made some sort of overreach or Lewis wasn't really that good, I mean, Lewis was a legitimate number 1 pick. We'll never know how. We'll find out later if it'll pan out because he's so young. But to me, it was a smart draft, and they did a really good job for the resources that they had.
Yeah, and I was hearing too that somebody said that the leadership qualities of Royce Lewis are comparable to Derek Jeter. And I don't know how we can compare that to Derek Jeter because of how great of a leader he was. But if he is any kind of a leader like that, and if he also says he models his game after Carlos Correa, which I'm sure many shortstops do. But if he's anywhere, if he can be like Carlos Correa, who was a number 1 pick, and some people were maybe thinking, well, the Astros should have taken this guy, like I think Mark Appel was the 2nd overall to the Phillies. They were thinking they should take Appel, but it turned out that Correa was by far the better choice. And I'm hoping that the Twins end up having something like that happen as well through this pick.
Yeah, exactly. I think the Astros got, same thing. When they took Correa, people, kind of criticized them saying, they're trying to save money. But what they did, obviously, the same thing as the Twins, was that year they took Correa, saved $2 million with that pick, and then use that money to sign Lance McCullers, who was obviously turned out to be a very good pitcher for them and would have never been able to sign him otherwise. And a guy named Rio Ruiz, who they ended up trading. I think traded him to the Braves maybe. I forget what trade exactly, but he was traded, and that was the year actually that Buxton was number 2 overall. That was the year that Correa went 1, Buxton went 2, and then Appel, I believe, what was it, 7, I think, that year, and kind of slid a little bit, and then didn't sign, and then went number 1 overall the next year to the Astros. And at this point, it seems like Appel's a total bust. I mean, and that's the thing, too. A lot of Twins fans, at the time, even when the Twins took Buxton, A lot of fans were mad they didn't take Capel, and he was this, Stanford pitcher that was a sure thing, and sure enough, he's an absolute bust. I mean, he hasn't done anything at all. His numbers at AAA this year are terrible. It was traded to the Phillies for Ken Giles. So you never know. That's the thing with drafts. You never know. And the thing is, too, sometimes fans get mad about who gets drafted. It's like, how many fans have actually seen any of these guys play? And even as a reporter, it's not like I got a chance to see Green or Lewis. I just can kind of go off what the front office and the scouts that have been doing this for a long time tell me. And it can be a little bit of a crapshoot, as we know. And with the comparisons to Jeter, I remember that was John Heyman who tweeted and wrote a little bit about that. And I think even that's kind of in their game, too. I think it wasn't just even leadership. It was also just the way they play the game, too, which is obviously a good thing. Jeter's a Hall of Fame player.
Yeah.
And Jeter, same thing. He had decent power, but not like, crazy power like Correa. But certainly, was a hit for a high average and all that. So yeah, I think that Lewis certainly has a high ceiling. We'll just kind of see how it goes, as the years go by.
Last thing on the draft, Hunter Green. I think a lot of people wanted the Twins to get him because he fires 100 miles an hour and all this great things, but it doesn't really seem like, I guess from what I understood, that he had a really good secondary or even third pitch. Maybe I'm wrong on that, and then also how as quickly as he was throwing 100 miles an hour, how quickly does that mean that his shoulder is going to be done? Because there's pitchers I think that are throwing that hard at that age that could easily get worn out or even find that their career is shortened because of how hard they're throwing, I guess.
Yeah, I almost find it's hard to know. I mean, some guys that don't throw hard get Tommy John and that kind of stuff too. So, velocity definitely for overthrowing certainly can't lead to injury. But you never know. Just because he throws 100 doesn't mean he's going to break down. Some guys, there's still some guys in the league that throw that hard that, have never had any issues in that sense. But you are right, though. He's 17. Green was young, too. Green's only, I think, 17, turning 18 or that, or he just turned 18. And you're right. I mean, the thing is, too, is how is the velocity going to hold up when, when you're in high school, you're pitching, once a week at the most, generally. And so you have a chance to throw 100 in that sense, and if you're pitching every 5 days in the minor leagues, is that velocity going to hold up? And there's injury risk, even if you didn't throw 100, And then last we saw, was it 3 years ago, the Marlins took Tyler Kolek from Texas, and he was a can't-miss high schooler who was throwing 100 miles per hour, and sure enough, of course, you got Tommy John the very next year. So that's the risk, That's the risk with a pitcher, and whether or not he throws 100 or 95, a high school pitcher, there's always a chance, even in the minor leagues, that they have to get Tommy John. So, Green's also considered a very good shortstop and a good offensive prospect. But truthfully, like I said, with Lewis being a shortstop as well and being a Gatorade, California Player of the Year, I think it's, Lewis is a better shortstop prospect. I think, obviously, the intrigue with Green is just how hard he throws and the fact that he can be a pitcher. And from what I've heard, too, it is a pretty easy 100. Like, it's not like it's over effort. And so I think that's why it's not, there's not that injury risk quite as much. And the thing is, too, is he's been smart with his family about, not being overused in the, some of those those, prospect games and the, all that kind of stuff, the perfect game, stuff like that. So, that's about Green, too. It does seem like he's a really good kid, too. And same with Lewis in terms of just understanding, that Green, being African-American, he's been hyped up, but it could be a good thing for this game. And, we know that in baseball right now, there's been a lot fewer African-Americans than have been in the past. And that, he's kind of been compared to like a LeBron James type, that kind of stuff. And Lewis, too, is, his father's African American, so I think it was the first time since like 1985 that 2 African Americans were taken with the first 2 picks. And so, I mean, those type of guys, if they go on to have great careers and can be good ambassadors for the game, it could do a lot for baseball in terms of, encouraging more and more, African Americans to play the game, which would be great. The better represented, in this game, the better. So yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it definitely was a very, very interesting draft, and I think just seeing those 2 were big prospects, and even just to see what McKay does as a guy that the Rays are going to let try pitching and hitting. So definitely some intrigue in this draft for sure.
Few things to wrap up here. Miguel Sano, we've seen, is just a monster. He hits home runs into the fountains at Kauffman Stadium. He can hit it anywhere. But I feel like he kind of got snubbed from being started over Jose Ramirez in the All-Star game. And I know it's a voting thing, but it kind of seemed he had quite a big lead there. It was like 400,000 votes or something at one time. So I'm wondering maybe if it was the Twins' kind of lack of success the last few weeks. That 1 week against Boston and Kansas City when they lost 3 of 4 too. Wonder if that is really kind of what set him back a little bit, the Twins' lack of success in that time. But I kind of feel like he got snubbed. Just talk about what you thought of, first of all, his season and him being a reserve instead of a starter.
Well, he's definitely a deserving All-Star for sure. As you said, the team did kind of struggle there before the actual voting ended. And part of it was truthfully because Sano kind of went into a little bit of a slump. Mm-hmm. And it kind of seems like when he's not going, the offense isn't going, and when he's going, the offense is going. So I just think that it didn't help too. They're on the road for 11 straight days, and usually obviously the balloting, a lot of it's done online, but there's a lot of in-stadium balloting as well. And if there's no home games for you to be able to have your fans vote, it makes it tough. And that was tough timing for them to have an 11-game trip right leading up to the actual day of the voting, which didn't help Sano's cause. But at the same time, I mean, Ramirez has had a great year. I mean, he's hitting for power too as a little guy, and is a good defender at third base.
Yeah.
You look at some of the advanced metrics, and they do see Ramirez is having a slightly better year than Sano. So in a sense, I think it's more of a toss-up. I would have loved to have seen Sano start, and hopefully he does it. Hopefully he does it in the future. But I don't think the fans necessarily got it wrong either. I mean, Ramirez really is having a great year.
Yeah.
So to me, it's kind of a toss-up in the fact that from what I saw, he didn't win by very many. Sorry, he didn't win by very many votes. So it wasn't like he lost by that much. Mm-hmm. But it is too bad because it would have been cool. But to see it would have been the first Twin starter since Maurer, I'm guessing, right? In
Probably. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it would have been cool, but we'll see. I'm sure we'll see him late in the game, and it'll be obviously awesome to see him in the home run derby.
Yeah. Taking a look here at the team's strengths and weaknesses, I think the number one strength is probably the power in the lineup. Maybe as one of the strengths. I mean, we still do lack some power, but I think one of it is just the power from the hitters. I think we've had quite a few home runs this year, especially from Sano, and some other guys have stepped up this year. Maybe it's not the number one strength, but and then I feel like the weakness is still probably the bullpen, and I would also lean towards average-wise in our lineup. It seems like there's nobody that can consistently be like a 300 hitter. Maurer used to be that guy, but he's just not anymore. But what do you think is number one strength and number one weakness of this team compared to earlier in the season? And do you think it's changed much, or do you think it's pretty much the same?
I think the number one strength actually is probably their defense.
Defense, okay.
Just because it's so athletic. The outfield defense has been as advertised or even better. I mean, Buxton leads the entire majors in defensive WAR and all that. He's been the best defensive player in baseball. And like I said earlier, Sano and Blanco have held their own at their positions. We know Castro is great behind the plate. Dozier is above average at second. Maurer's been a Gold Glover at first base, in my opinion.
Yeah. So
really, I feel like that helps the pitching staff, which kind of makes you think if they weren't so good defensively, how bad would the ERAs be?
Yeah.
So, but you're right about the power. The power is definitely a real thing. Sano's got legitimate power. I know when Vargas is up here, he does too as well. Even Castro has some power as a catcher. Dozier, last year at 42 home runs, this year isn't quite at that kind of pace, but you never know. I mean, last year he didn't have very many home runs in the first half either. He kind of got hot in the second half. So he's got legitimate power. So yeah, I mean, I think that Kepler, has some power and right.
Rosario.
Rosario had a 3-homer game, and as far as average or right, I mean, the one guy who's kind of been hotter recently, hitting close to 290, is Rosario. He's finally kind of getting the average up there, but he hasn't really drawn any walks, which doesn't help.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's really not one guy in that lineup that is a really high average guy, because even Sano's having a great year, strikes out a lot, so his average is probably going to be closer to 280. And Mauer's kind of a 280, 290 guy now with a 360 on base. And Rosario probably really is a 280, 290 guy too as well. There's really nobody, and Dozier strikes out so much that he's not a 300 hitter. Mm-hmm. There's really nobody in that lineup. Even when if Buxton becomes a really good hitter, which I think he's still young enough, he can figure it out. Mm-hmm. He's not really, even with the speed, I don't know that he's a 300 hitter because he strikes out so much.
Yeah.
And Grossman's an on-base guy, but not an average guy. So, yeah, I think that's definitely a weakness. And as we know, the bullpen is definitely an issue, and even the rotation past, Santana and Barrios is an issue. So there still are some weaknesses on this club for sure. And that's why I'm curious to see if the front office really looks at this roster and says, oh, yeah, we could really win it, this year.
Yeah.
Let's go all in. I just don't see that really happening because I think there are too many weaknesses. But with this young core, I think they continue to get better. And if they can, build on the way they played in the first half and, get even a taste of what it's like to be in a pennant race, it would be good for all these young guys.
Yeah. One thing I guess I would say that maybe would lead the Twins to actually trying to get some guys would be the Astros are really good. They're really good, obviously. They seem to have, I think they have 60 wins already this year. But other than the Astros, it does not seem like anybody in the American League is overwhelmingly better than the Twins. Because it just, like the Indians, they're only 2.5 games ahead of the Twins, and everybody thought, oh, the Indians are winning the Central, write it off, it's completely done. But it seems like this year, other than the Astros, I think the Twins, honestly, are probably, if they can get a couple of pieces, I think they could actually have a shot of at least getting one series victory, just depending on who they would play. Just because I feel like this year it's kind of a weakened. I mean, there's a lot of teams that can compete, but I don't think there's really too many teams that are just like so much far and away better than the Twins. But I would also say that I still do think the Twins are at least 3, if not 4 or 5 pieces away from moving into contention, as in one of the final 4 teams, because I think they need at least one more starter. I think 2 relievers, honestly, at least. And I said no. I think they need a guy that can hit for average, and maybe even 2, because honestly, there's not really too many guys at all, like we were saying, that hit for average. So I think that the Twins could really benefit from at least 1, if not 2 guys that can hit average-wise. But, yeah, like I said, it's kind of not an overwhelming favorite to win it all in the AL, I guess. But at the same time, you're still quite a few pieces away. So it is kind of an interesting thing with the trade deadline. What are your thoughts on the trade deadline? If they make a move, what would it be? And if they don't, why wouldn't they?
Yeah, like you said, the AL is interesting. Obviously, the Astros running away with their division, but the Indians haven't quite done what they're supposed to do or expected to do. But, I mean, I think on paper, though, the Indians are definitely much better than the Twins on paper, and you could put the Red Sox in that category, too, in the East, that kind of thing. So there are some teams, obviously, that are just, built to win now, more so than the Twins. But like I said kind of a little bit earlier, like I don't see them being big buyers. If they do buy, it's probably going to be for relief help. I just don't think they're going to sacrifice their future for this season because, like you said, there's still so many pieces away. I think they're more likely to address those pieces in the offseason, whether it's trades, free agent signings, things of that nature. I just think that that's more likely to happen in the offseason. I think they're more likely to kind of just supplement things maybe a little bit at the deadline and see, if that's enough for now. But it is interesting because this could be a year to kind of strike. Like you said, there's no real team other than the Astros that's really dominating. But, yeah, I just think at this point the Indians should still win the division. And that's, I think they'll be in contention for that wild card spot. But, yeah, I think there's too many weaknesses in this team to really, contend and be legitimate contenders. But, it's hard to obviously predict in baseball. Crazy things do happen sometimes. But as we talked about, there's just too many weaknesses still that need to be fixed, and I just don't think they're going to go all out and try to fix all those at the deadline. Because I still think this front office is taking more of a long view than they are kind of looking at the short term at this season.
Yeah. Yeah, but it is weird though. More with baseball than any other sport. I think that if you get hot at the right time and another team isn't as hot as you or they're cold, you can make some noise in the postseason. Where in the NFL, the team that more times than not, the team that's better is always going to win. Where baseball, it's like, that's not necessarily true, because if you just have one or two things go your way in a baseball game, you got a good shot to win.
Yeah, definitely. And even look at last year, the Indians, get into the playoffs, had a lot of injuries to their rotation. Everyone wrote them off. And sure enough, they got all the way to the World Series and a 3-1 lead on the Cubs before blowing it. So, and that's actually really is hard to, especially in a short series, anything can happen. But it's just like we've talked about, like outside of, let's say the Twins were in the playoffs or whatever. I mean, who pitching wise in this team right now would you actually count on?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Santana, Barrios, Rogers, Kitzler. But is there anybody else really on this roster right now that you've been really, count on that guy to come in and get a big out in the playoffs? I mean, that's the question. And there are some veterans that they could pitch better, and Belisle and Presley and those type of guys, but they have ERAs above 7 right now. So so it's hard, and Mejia's getting better, I think, and but yeah, there just isn't too many guys that you can really count on pitching wise of this team right now, and that's still such a weakness for them. But I just don't think they're going to get their pitching depth in order more until next year. And I think the second half we'll kind of see if some young guys like Fernando Romero, or, Steven Gonzalez, or even maybe, Felix Jorge again come up. Because to me, I think they need to continue to keep seeing what they have in these young guys. And the more they can see some of these young prospects in the majors and see what they can do there, the more they'll kind of know how ready they're going to be to compete, next year and beyond.
Yeah, and that leads me to my second to last question for you. Gonzalez and Romero, they both seem, I've looked at some stats from AAA, and they both seem like they have been pitching really well. First of all, are you surprised that neither one of those guys came up instead of Jorge to start? And second, when would be a good time that you would expect them to come up?
It was a little surprising that it was Jorge, but it made sense. He was lined up for it. He's got really good control. Mm-hmm. And it kind of, his emotions don't get the best of him for the most part. So I think they kind of thought he's a good guy to put in there. He's not going to walk a lot of guys or get too affected by the moment. But the issue clearly with him was that, and it's kind of a little bit of an issue in the minor leagues too, is he has really good control, but sometimes he throws too many strikes and it leads to home runs. Mm-hmm. So we saw, Hosmer homer off him in that first start. Yeah. Gave up, I think, 3 home runs in his last start. Mm-hmm. So I think that Gonzalez and Romero definitely have a chance to be up here. Romero definitely throws harder than Jorge and is a much, more of a strikeout guy and has more upside, but also doesn't have quite the control that he does as well. Mm-hmm. And he can be he can kind of get in his own head a little bit sometimes too, Romero. But his stuff is great.
Yeah.
And Gonzalez's stuff, isn't great. It's solid, but he's a lefty with pretty good command. So yeah, I think Gonzalez is probably closest to the majors of those three, just because he's already reached AAA. He's got good command, but he's not like an overpowering lefty either. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious to see how his stuff will play in the major leagues. Mm-hmm. But I do think we'll see those guys up there. It kind of depends on injuries. If Santiago's in the DL right now, if Gibson were to continue to struggle, if he could be up here. If Cologne doesn't work out, we could see those guys up here. But I think for now, I think they're going to stick with Gibson in the short term, see what they have in Mejia, obviously, and then, see what they have in Cologne as well. But at some point, I certainly could see some of those guys coming up here, later in the year.
Yeah, you think September would be a possibility for?
Yeah, definitely.
For that? Okay. And you wouldn't expect them to call either one of them up for relief help. You wouldn't think it would strictly be for starting. I would hope so anyway, because it seems like the Twins, once they try somebody in the bullpen, it seems like, oh well, maybe he could fit in the bullpen, and then they never bring him back to start. So I think it would be for starting, I would imagine. Yeah,
although Romero, there's always a chance they could bring him up for relieving, just to kind of get a taste of the majors and he throws so hard, his stuff would play great as a reliever, and kind of give him a taste of the majors. And also the one thing you can do too to make a reliever at the end of the year would be just to kind of cut his innings lower, because you don't want to overwork these guys.
Yeah.
So yeah, if they're looking to cut down on their innings, maybe they do, see what they have in Romero as a reliever just for this year. But I don't think this new front office is going to fall in love with a 22-year-old as a reliever if he's got the stuff to start.
Yeah. And my last question for you, Rhett. So 2 games above 500 right now and only 2.5 out of the Central. What is a realistic expectation from what you've seen so far this season? Where do the Twins finish? Do they finish in second? And how many wins total? And what do they make the playoffs?
I see it kind of similar to 2 years ago, where they're going to stick around and hang around 500 and finish with a winning record. I can see them winning, maybe 84 games or something like that, which is probably good enough to kind of stick around and be contention for that second wildcard spot, but ultimately probably not enough. And we talked about the pitching depth. To me, is just such a concern for the whole season for them to, I just don't know if they're going to get enough pitching to really be a playoff team. My prediction is, I think they're going to probably continue to contend and should be good experience for the young guys. But ultimately, I think the pitching just isn't enough, and they're probably more likely. I think they're going to be, 500-ish the rest of the way, which means they'll finish a couple of games above 500. But unless they go on some sort of run that I'm not really expecting, I see them more as a team that's, on the fringes, but just isn't, not quite good enough to make the playoffs.
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the season, I kind of said 85 games is the max I could see this team winning, and I'm going to probably stick by that. But I do think that is a possibility if they do go on a little bit of a run. Like if Dozier would somehow go on another rampage like he did last year in the second half of the season, and Sano doesn't go cold, and if Buxton would continues his defense and maybe even hits a little bit.
Yeah, start seeing that help a lot.
Yeah, things could go. I guess I wouldn't be totally surprised if the Twins do go on a run.
Yeah, totally agree.
But at the same time, I would be surprised if they go over 85 wins. I just don't see that happening.
Exactly. Totally agree.
So you can follow Rhett Bollinger on Twitter at Rhett Bollinger. Any articles coming out this week for you, Rhett? Or are you just kind of completely stepping away? And also anything else that you want to promote here? Yeah,
definitely. Some articles coming out this week. The next couple of days here. There's kind of one that's kind of a look at the first half and kind of looks at who the first half MVP was, the pitcher of the first half, what went right, what went wrong. It's kind of a formatted look back at the first half with a lot of influence. I thought was pretty good, and a good video highlight package with it as well, with all the top highlights from the first half. Also coming out is a story that's going to look at what's coming up, what they're going to do at the deadline, like we've talked about, who could be traded, what they could be looking for, things like that, and who they're playing out of the break. Story on that, and kind of got some comments from Thad Levine about deadline for that story as well. And then I'm planning to write an inbox and answer the fans' questions for a story that'll run, I believe, Thursday or Friday. And we'll have stories on Miguel Sano and the Home Run Derby tonight, and stories people have someone's covering for me at the All-Star game, and we'll have stories on Sano and Kinsler and and obviously Santana. So there's going to be a lot of content on that site this week. So twinsbaseball.com, MLB.com, even though it is, the next 4 days the Twins don't play, there's going to be a lot of content on there and stuff, kind of looking back at the first half and looking forward. And it's always fun to see how these guys do in the All-Star game and the Home Run Derby. And we'll have a lot of video and video packages and highlights and all that. So if anyone, doesn't get a chance to watch the Derby or the game, any plays that involve Twins and all of, Sano's home runs will have great video packages on the site to go along with the stories. So you can catch those highlights on there as well. So, so as much as the nice thing is the stories, I wrote them last night, a lot of those ones, so I can take the next couple of days off here and relax. But we'll also have a lot of great content on the site for sure.
Absolutely, Rhett. I really appreciate you joining the show again. You can follow him on Twitter at Rhett Bollinger. Wishing you a good rest of the week. Get a little bit of rest, but enjoy some baseball too.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it was great going on again.
You bet. Thanks a lot. We appreciate it. So that is going to do it this week for the Shuby Show. Again, thanks to Rhett, and we will see you guys next week. I'll be having a guest to talk about the Lakers and their draft with getting Lonzo Ball, and also talk a little bit about the offseason and the season ahead for the Lakers. We'll do that next week. Until then, see ya next week. Have a great week, everybody.
Thanks for listening to The Shuby Show. We hope you mildly enjoyed yourself with more never-ending nonsense with yours truly. For more nonsense, go to the website, theschubyshow.com. Get the show on iTunes, Google Play, YouTube, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Until next time, Skol.